Okay, we are on.
Namaste. My name is Nalini Mohan, and I will be the moderator for today's session. And I would like to extend Navaratri greetings to all of you. Today's talk will be on Goel on Christian aggression. And Dr. Elst, Conrad Elst will be the speaker for today's talk. Dr. Elst.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Sitaram Goel's critique of Christianity. This is mainly in these three books: The History of Hindu-Christian Encounters, written in 1989. This happens to be the book that got me in touch with Sitaram Goel. I read it when I was living in Varanasi at the time. I had to go to Delhi for a few days, and to spend my time usefully, I went to the bookstore area, the publisher's area, Daryaganj, where I found this book. I read it all through. Then the next day, the bookseller told me that I could visit Sitaram Goel, who was working just around the corner. And so he called to make an appointment, and then we got to know each other, and the rest is history. Then another important book is this one, Catholic Ashrams, Sannyasis or Swindlers. This is about the Catholic strategy of inculturation. And then an analysis of the role of Jesus in Christian theology, Jesus Christ, an artifice for aggression. There is one that I seem to be missing. It is the, I reread it all through just now, which is the introduction that he wrote to a new edition of the Yogi Committee report. This was a report written in 1956 about the practices of Christian missionaries in the tribal belt. And so he saw the importance of this, he republished it, and then his own foreword is quite interesting for the problem of Christianity for India. Okay, let's start with a little PowerPoint. Yes, okay. Right, oh, sorry, this one. Okay, the early history, where it starts. So he takes the trouble to document this history. Which is like the only time I think so far that the Hindu has done this, and he finds that the history of Hindu-Christian encounters starts quite early, namely in 304, when two Hindu temples in Upper Mesopotamia, which is today's Syria, are destroyed by Saint Gregory, so one of the church fathers. There was already a critique of Brahmans in other writings by church fathers. So early Christianity was aware of the existence of Hinduism, which was somewhat present in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. Already since very long, we know that the Harappan traders had already a presence in Mesopotamia, and like there's Harappan writing there. So that continued all through to the end of the Roman Empire. Now this contrasts with the welcome that Christians were given in India. Well, welcome, I don't know, but they were given asylum. they were let in and they were not asked any questions. You see, Hindus are not known to have asked them, what is your religion? What is the contents of your religion? And certainly not to have made their stay conditional on the contents of their religion. So they were welcome. This was in the 4th century also, when, you see, Christianity became more and more dominant in the Roman Empire. And in the Persian Empire, which was the main enemy of the Roman Empire, therefore, the Christians came under suspicion. And so we see Christians running away from there to India. And the route to India was already well known. Like we know that in Kerala, they had trade with the Romans. Even earlier, King Solomon from the Bible 3,000 years ago traded with the area around what is now Mumbai. So, so the place was sufficiently known, and so Christians came to settle there. Now, a later fable is that it was not in the 4th, but in the 1st century, 52 Anno Domini, that Saint Thomas, the apostle, came to Kerala and was murdered there by Brahmins. Here, Goel has not done first-hand historical work, but he has published the work of Ishwar Sharan, which contains plenty of fresh original data about what he calls the myth of Saint Thomas. You see, he shows that the only Christian document that deals with Saint Thomas actually, and of course it is only a story, it's unreliable as history. But even then, even if we take it at face value, it doesn't say that he went to Kerala. It says that he went to India, which was a very vague notion at the time. And all through the Middle Ages, like when Columbus landed in Hispaniola in the Caribbean, he thought he had reached Japan, and he called the people Indio, meaning Indian, because he thought he had reached India. Well, which means that India at the time practically meant Asia, okay? So yes, St. Thomas went east from Palestine, so he went to Asia, which is also called India. And the area where he lands is described as Persian-speaking and desert-like. So this was probably Afghanistan, Pakistani Northwest. It had nothing to do with the lush vegetation of Kerala. And there, he is not murdered, as the fable then says. He is executed by a king after committing a number of crimes against society. And the king is in fact very generous. He asks him to leave. He says, you're causing trouble here. People are unhappy at your presence. So he doesn't execute him at all. He says, no, please leave. And he doesn't want to. And that's then finally when he gets executed. And he gets executed in the Aramaic text, beruhme, which means with spear. He gets killed with a spear. And in Aramaic, you normally don't mark vowels, only consonants. And so these consonants are the same as Brahma. And so this got interpreted when the Portuguese came as that he was killed by Brahmins. And this took place supposedly in Mylapore near Chennai, where then later, after centuries, this church was built, one you see there depicted, the Santo Tomé Basilica, which is totally built on false history. Now, if you write that in an Indian newspaper, immediately you will be censored. And a number of historical cases have been mentioned. And every politician who has to give a speech about Kerala or about Indian Christianity will very, very certainly say that in 52 AD, St. Thomas came to India, and in spite of his great, nice message, he was murdered by ugly, evil Brahmins. Well, this is all a fable. And those politicians concerned absolutely do not want to hear that it was only a fable. Now we make a big jump to the colonial era. So what happened in the meantime, we know very little about. The Christians down south mainly escaped the Islamic invasions, which more affected North India. And they're not noticed for causing any trouble. They become a prosperous merchant caste. They're also known for, well, something that merchants in the Roman Empire did, namely to trade slaves. You know, that was not a colonial phenomenon that already existed. But so coming to the colonial age, we first have the Portuguese. So in the Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal, under the aegis of the Pope, the world was divided in two halves. One half was going to Spain and the other to Portugal. And the line went through South America so that Brazil fell to Portugal, the rest to Spain. And then on the other side of the world, the line went through China, Indonesia, so that the Philippines fell to Spain, and Macau, East Timor, and certainly Goa fell to Portugal. So the Portugals come over. This was an important moment in the history of the Catholic Church, namely the founding of the Jesuit order. And they will play a very large role in the mission movement in India, far more than in other places. And today, a very large percentage of new Jesuits are Indians. You see in the West, certainly in Europe, but also in Latin America to some extent, and in North America, increasingly. Christianity has held its own for a long time in America, not like in Europe, but now it is also starting to erode. And so there they don't have many priests and many fathers, many monks anymore. And in places like Africa, Latin America, the priestly celibacy, which is typical for the Catholic Church, not for the Protestants, creates a great problem because many men are not taken seriously in Africa if they don't have a wife, if they don't have children. So often you see priests are formally priests and formally celibate, but have a de facto wife on the side, or even several of them. Now in India, by contrast, the culture has a lot of respect for celibacy. And so percentage-wise, India produces far more Catholic monks than other parts of the world. And so many of them are drawn specifically to the Jesuit order. And one of the founders was Francis Xavier. And so he came to India. Goel calls him a pirate. He wrote to the King of Portugal for the permission to establish the Inquisition in India, which persecuted people either because they were pagans or because they were lapsed Christians or they were under suspicion. Like especially in Spain and Portugal, this concerned Jews and Muslims who had converted to Catholicism, but who were suspected to still in secret be continuing to practice their old religion. And so in India too, this especially concerned the, ex-Hindus, or even also under different laws, the Hindus themselves. It was the start of anti-Brahmanism. We know this because later, you see, when the Portuguese discovered the limits of their military power, when they are forced to make treaties with neighboring Hindu kings, these treaties stipulate that the Portuguese have to stop persecuting Brahmins. It's also motivated by the duty of Hindus to prevent Brahma Hatya, the killing of Brahmins. At any rate, they make it a point which shows that this was a problem. Strangely, the Kerala Christians, who had been good neighbors of the Hindus for 1,000 years, start flocking to the Portuguese. And so this the seed that Christianity has sown now bears fruit. They also become Christian activists and join in the conversion operation. In the 90s, when I was mapping out India's religious landscape, I noticed that in North India, Catholic institutes were typically led by people from Kerala. You see, the time of the European missionaries was already over then. It's completely over now. And so the old Christians, the Kerala Christians, were taking over that role. And so now, on the Catholic side at least, less on the Protestant side, to talk about foreign missionaries means that you don't know what you're talking about. Foreign missionaries there are a thing of the past, or as far as there are foreigners, they're not Europeans anymore. Like you may have heard a few years ago in Afghanistan, a number of missionaries had been kidnapped by some Islamic group, and then they were released after negotiations and so on. It turned out that they were Koreans. And so it's important to write the history of colonial Catholicism. It's also important to realize that this is over, that a new era has started after independence. Anyway, now let's go back to colonial Catholicism. An important development, Xavier lived in the 16th century, now in the 17th century. The important figure to note is Roberto de' Nobili. He was an Italian nobleman, and it's important that he was an Italian nobleman because that means that his family was in a position to lobby the Vatican, which was necessary. Why? Well, he settled in Madurai, far from the Portuguese centers of power. Also far from the coast. In the coast, there were once in a while Portuguese ships trading and so on. Here he was like 300 kilometers away from the coast. And so he was completely surrounded by Hindus. And he decided to behave like a Hindu. So he learned very well Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu. And he dressed up like a sannyasi and lived like that, certainly as far as people could see. And so this gained him more respect. You see, the Firangis, the Westerners that Hindus knew at the time, they didn't like at all. They were beef eaters. They didn't keep all the purity rules. Even physically, they were smelly. In fact, this was a fairly typical Christian thing at the time in Europe, in Spain and so on. You see that the Muslims continued the ancient Roman practice of public baths, you know, what they call in Arabic hammam. The Christians, by contrast, didn't. And so this was one way of discerning, of distinguishing the two from one another. The Christians were stinking. Now, you see the Hindus also were quite sensitive to this. So Roberto di Nobili completely adapted, took over the Hindu lifestyle. And so he did succeed in his original project, which was to make converts. And it is he who is the start of the Inculceration Policy. Now, this was very controversial at the time in Rome. For instance, in China, the missionaries, the Jesuits, he was a Jesuit. You see this SJ behind someone's name means Societatis Jesu, you know, of the Society of Jesus, which means he's a Jesuit. Okay, so De Nobili was a Jesuit. Now, his colleagues in China at the time did try to do the same thing, inculceration. And so they said, you see, these rituals and so on that Chinese do, they're not really religion. You see, they're not devilish. They're not really in conflict with Christianity. You should only interpret them properly. Well, that didn't succeed. You see, they had to stop that policy. By contrast, Roberto de Nobili succeeded. And so this was partly because of his own family in Rome that lobbied the papacy. And so the Pope in 1622-23 accepted it, including one of his more peculiar demands, namely that caste distinctions would be allowed. Now here, the Pope had no problem at all with the idea of inequality. You see, the egalitarian argument against caste didn't exist yet in those days. I mean, Europe had plenty of inequality. But, you know, there are specific forms in caste distinction, notions of purity and so on, that are a bit strange. And there you could say, well, you know, this is not Christian. And today's propagandists, you know, in the Ambedkarite vein also say that. Now, in those days, the Pope okayed caste, which meant that in older South Indian churches, you have two entrance doors, one for high castes and one for low castes. There was even a curtain or a wall inside the church to make it unneeded for them to even watch one another. Okay. There was nothing particularly anti-caste in Catholicism at the time, in spite of what the missionaries today are saying, that Christianity is naturally egalitarian. Interesting in his case also, Roberto de Nobili, is that he started, well, preaching Christianity and giving arguments. You know, he was an apologist for Christianity. And so he provoked in Hindus a reaction, so that you get from then on anti-Christian argumentations. And so more and more pamphlets and real books are written and published where Hindus take apart Christianity. Not always sophisticated, but okay, it's a start. This is a great contrast with Islam, where the very first peep into Islamic doctrine takes place around 1875 with Arya Samaj founder Dayanand Saraswati, who devotes one chapter in his book to the problem of Islam. Okay, so of course, Goel has himself not only documented these debating attempts, but also continued this argumentation himself. Then you get colonial Protestantism, the great rival. Now here you see Hindus usually don't know much about the distinction between those two. And so today that distinction is becoming less, but historically it's quite profound. It has led to religious wars in Europe and even recently in Ireland. So that's quite a distinct history. In India, especially because, you know, the Protestants first, the Dutch, then the English who came, they were initially not very interested in the mission because those who came were traders. And so they noticed that missionaries create conflict, create reaction, and that conflict is bad for business. Indeed, it reflected upon the businessmen themselves because they were also Europeans. And so if being a European got associated with meddling in religion and, you know, being anti-Hindu, that would be bad for business. And so they initially prohibited the mission. And it is William Wilberforce who forced the permission for the mission through Parliament. Now, this is, in terms of publicity, a very strong point for the church, because William Wilberforce has the historical merit of getting slavery, first the slave trade, then slavery itself, abolished. Well, the first to abolish it were first the Danes in the Virgin Islands, which was then a Danish colony, and then the French revolutionaries. But you see, when William Wilberforce did this, it was far more important because he controlled, in this respect, the policies of the largest empire on earth. And so what the British did was not just abolish slavery, but also forcing that abolition on other powers. Like they forced the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire, which still existed, to abolish slavery. That was quite a sensation and quite daring. So you see, that same person also patronized the start of the Protestant mission in India. So, you know, for propaganda purposes, that's quite good, you know, for the Christians. Still, you see, the East India Company tried to, you know, neutralize the missions a bit by directing them to the tribal belts and to marginal groups, so that again, you see, there would be no conflict with the upper castes that they were, you know, dealing with. This was before independence. This was the situation until independence. In fact, the missions, to quite an extent, identified with the tribal groups, you know, whom they converted, so to speak, to terminologically. You know, it is they who started calling them Adivasi, which is a term from the 1920s. And so trying to instill the concept of an Aryan invasion, which had then grown up in Europe, and to instill it in Indians' own consciousness, that you see the tribals were the aboriginals and they themselves, all the other Hindus, they were invaders. And that remains still today a pillar of Christian propaganda in India. Typical for the Protestants is that they do not have this inculceration. Now, this soft line Protestant churches, the Anglicans, or, you know, the Church of South India and so on, they start this to some extent. But the really hardcore evangelicals based in the United States, they still absolutely continue what was once the general Christian line, which is now toned down by Catholics especially, they continue the line of demonizing Hinduism, of saying, oh, you Hindus, you worship false gods, you practice idol worship and so on. Also culturally, you can see that they bring in Western cultural forms where the Catholics try to Indianize their worship. Like, for instance, the evangelicals bring in musical instruments that are used in churches in America. They preach in English, they teach in English and so on. Whereas many Catholics try to indigenize in that respect also. Right, so you see, you read Goel and you get all the details about this. I'm going over it here very fast. An argument in India, especially by the RSS, is that the missions are anti-national. And so some say that, yeah, we have nothing against the missions on condition that they Indianize. So if you get converted by a priest with, dressed in saffron with a tilak on his forehead, that's okay for them, Well, you see, it is true that this question of anti-national, missions being anti-national, that plays a certain role. Like, take the experience of Japan, which Goelji discusses. Initially, the Japanese were tolerant. You see, they had accepted Buddhism before, coming from China. And so they were tolerant against Christianity. But then they discovered that the converts, you see, they were not initially upset about the strange beliefs of those converts or of the missionaries. But they noticed that the converts became loyal to Portugal or Spain or Holland. And so this foreign loyalty was a problem to them. And then the repression started, and finally it became very thorough. And so in and around the city of Nagasaki, a certain Christian community continued. Mostly Christianity was stopped. So you see, in India, you could expect the same thing. Now, at the time, well, the problem didn't pose itself during British rule. The missionaries were quite happy with British rule, which was not like the Portuguese had been a strong supporter and organizer of the missions, but at least it protected the missionaries. And they were very afraid, you see, when this protection fell away in 1947. So in China, the missionaries were extremely lucky if they were only expelled. Mostly they were imprisoned or killed. And so this could have happened in India. But, much to their surprise, after 1947, the initial resistance of Indians against the missionaries stopped or weakened and gradually died out, because the new government under Nehru was all in favor of anything and everything that was anti-Hindu, and especially patronized the missions, or at least, you see, allowed them to bring in money, to bring in personnel, and so allowed the missionary operation to grow and grow. I hear that recently a Christian convert has been made chief minister of Punjab, which is their new great mission territory. You heard earlier of their strong growth in Andhra Pradesh, where they also acquired the chief ministership, which then itself became an instrument for more conversions. So this is now happening in Punjab. And so in the struggle against Christianity, do note that the Christians are making gains upon gains, that Hindus are losing and losing. So Goel, he was already quite concerned about this and was already aware that in a way, Christianity is a greater danger for India than Islam. Also because it can more easily convince Hindus, even, not just the tribals or so, but educated urban Hindus, can be made to fall for Christian propaganda. That propaganda is adjusted, of course, to its audience. And indeed, you must have heard of the Joshua Project, based in America, but that has mapped out the whole Indian population, that knows about specific groups, what their needs are, what their propensities are, what their traditions are, and so on, what their situation is, and how to tailor the missionary message to their specific needs. In mass psychology, the missionaries are very good, very sophisticated. So you read all the details in Goelji, and so he admits that he also didn't have the answer, not a complete answer at any rate. It's one thing to show that Christianity is wrong and so on, that he does, but then you see, to make that effective, to make government policies take those facts into account, well, that's not happening. That hasn't happened under Congress, under Indira. That's not happening today. Now, independence for the missionaries turned out favorable. Yet, well, they hadn't entirely expected it. That's why in 1947, when the Muslims succeeded in partitioning India, there were a few faint attempts at Christian partitions in the areas of Christian concentration, especially the south of Kerala, then a few of the tribal concentration areas, but nothing came of it. The Christians also didn't have their heart in it as much as the Muslims had had. Still, separatism continued in the Northeast, where Christianization was proceeding very fast, became very successful, and so the large majority in a few of the northeastern states is now Christian. And already for several generations, which means that even the memory of their own indigenous tradition is disappearing. So that separatism existed there partly because they became the majority and felt confident enough, felt less need to separate themselves, and partly because of diplomatic skills employed by the central government. That can't be denied. There is now not really any separatist problem anymore. Like the Nagas have reconciled themselves with India, but of course on condition of a number of privileges. And so this Article 307 that exists in Kashmir, it has varieties. It has slightly softer versions for Mizoram and Nagaland. And so they are relatively separate from India. And so that arrangement is fine for them. But so today, you see, to identify Christianity as anti-national is a bit obsolete. And so Goel makes much of the political problem that Christianity posed, but he also refocuses the debate of Christianity's doctrine, which is really what it is originally all about. When the Roman Empire was Christianized, it was not colonized by any foreign power. It was Christianized from within. And so in the case of India, India has withstood attempts to Christianize it by colonizing powers. But now that it is independent, it is being Christianized. And most of the Christianization issues from Indians themselves. Even those American-based evangelical churches are not going to send some white fellow to an Indian TV debate about religion. You know, they know better than that. They take someone native, someone whom they have trained and so on, who of course owes a lot of the Christian influence to them, but who is native. And so more and more Christianity simply is fully Indian religion, even though with a foreign origin. And so now, if you want to do anything about Christianity, it's no use anymore to talk about anti-national, they have to indigenize and so. No, they have indigenized. So now you have to focus on what is wrong with Christian doctrine. And so this is the mainstay of Goel's work. He documents this policy of inculceration. In fact, he himself was treasurer of the Abhishektananda Society for Interreligious Dialogue. Now, what is this Abhishektananda Society? So it was an association for propagating and studying the work of Swami Abhishektananda. Abhishektananda means the joy of the anointed one, which is the meaning of the word Christ, anointed. Christos in Greek is a translation of Hebrew Messiah, so which means anointed. So the anointed one means the crown prince, the one who's going to inherit the throne. That's why in the gospel, much is made of Jesus' descent from King David, because you see, he's supposed to be, or the Messiah, according to the Old Testament, is supposed to be the inheritor of the throne, the one who's going to restore King David's kingdom after a long foreign rule. So Abhishektananda, has a Hindu sounding name, has a Sanskrit name, but, unbeknownst to most Hindus, it's also very much a Christian name. Aha. So his real name was Henri Le Sceau, he was French. But so he took on the name Abhishektananda, and he was already a monk, and so he also became a Hindu monk or a Hindu-looking monk. Another fellow is a convert to Catholicism from Anglicanism, Bede Griffiths. You see, he had some interesting dialogues with Ram Swarup, Sitaram Goel's friend and mentor. They're also documented in his history of Hindu Christian encounters. Many converts resent this. You see, they don't want a church that looks like a Hindu temple. They don't want to be reminded of Krishna and murtis and stuff. They want something fully Christian. They want to get away from anything that smells like Hindu. They've been like told, that Hinduism is bad and so on. So they separate even from their own family, because they're all devil worshippers and so on. They don't want to have anything to do with this. And so you see here, you have a repeat of the old church's objections against inculceration. Anyway, inculceration is the future, so to speak. It's going on. So these people were the great pioneers of that. And so it's not like Goel and Ram Swarup have been able to stop this movement, not at all. So Goelji was the treasurer of the Abhishektananda Society. Another person you might know who was a member of this was Bettina Boehmer. She was an art historian and so on. I met her a few times. But so you see, those people are known in the West as interreligious dialogue, as broad-minded and so on. In reality, well, they were still Christian first of all. And so they finally pestered Goalji out. They started a whispering campaign against him, and so it became unbearable. There is an Abhishektananda Center for Interreligious Dialogue. Now, interreligious dialogue in Catholic parlance refers to a mission strategy. You see, you shouldn't go talk to people of a different religion unless the intention is to convert them. And so there's a papal encyclical, as it is called, Vatican Statement Redemptoris Missio, which means the mission of the Redeemer, where this is explicitly stated. You see, interreligious dialogue, of course, has the form of an equal meeting of minds, but in reality, of course, it is a new form, a modern form of, extending the Catholic influence. So Goalji republished the Yogi Committee report. This was written in 1956, and so it documents, it's a very big book, so it documents with numerous examples the fraud and inducement used by the missionaries to convert the tribals. It's also used in other areas, depending on, again, you see the missionaries are very good at, massaging the needs and personalities of the different communities. So the missionaries, of course, did everything to suppress it. Like they bought up all the copies. In the theology faculty of my own university, or where I studied, which is one of the main centers, of the Catholic world, it prided itself, it called itself the thought center of the Catholic world. Okay, so it had an important theology faculty where I took a few courses, and I know that library quite well. Now they do have a copy of the Christian answer to the Yogi report. So they wrote a counter book. But they don't have the Yogi Committee report itself. You see, that's stacked away, in the cellar. There is a room where they keep books that are not for public viewing. So it's there. So in India, they made sure that this book didn't reach anyone, certainly not the politicians. And so Goalji relates how he met a sannyasin who was, who worked in these areas, who knew the problem intimately, who was very happy when the Yogi Committee report came out, but who was quite frustrated that he couldn't reach anyone with it. And so like the Jan Sangh, which is the BJP at the time, showed no interest, much less Congress. Under Indira Gandhi, the few tribal members of parliament succeeded in getting anti-conversion laws passed in Orissa and in Madhya Pradesh. They also tried to have it at national level, but that was, well, sidelined, not officially blocked, but effectively rendered, impossible by Indira. And even then, you see, in the states where they had been passed, they remained dead letter. As even today in a few more states, such laws have been passed. The only effect is that they can be used by the missionaries outside India or the Christian media outside India to show, oh, Christians are persecuted in India. Usually conversion is forbidden in India, and so on. But you see, to use the good side of these laws, that just doesn't happen. At best, you see, people are forced to declare before a judge that they're going to convert, but their conversion is not stopped. And so if you ask my own opinion, well, you don't, but I'll give it anyway. These anti-conversion laws are stupid because they don't function, they don't work. And Hindus often clamor for laws like a birth control law. You see, what do you do against Islamic demography? A birth control law. You see, in India, these laws don't work. Such laws, such communal laws, only have an effect on Hindus. They're not obeyed by the minorities. Even in China, and this is about the anti-conversion law specifically, even in China, you see, they have a very strong anti-Christian and anti-Islamic policy. But you see, Christians convert millions. And you see, they are confident that within a few years, China will be the largest Christian country in the world, before the United States, before Brazil. And so ultimately, they have the same plan for India. And so the recent breakthrough in Punjab really gives them more confidence about this. And so the fact that there is a Hindu government that can be used as propaganda to the outside world. Oh, Christians are threatened by the Hindu fanatics and so on. Whereas they know, they don't say it in public, but they know perfectly well that this government, this supposedly Hindu government, is never going to do anything against them. On the contrary. So, you see, Goelji, kept a certain contact with the Vanavasi Kalyana Ashram, the Sangha organization for tribals specifically, that has a few successes to its credit in stopping conversions. Christians and secularists are sufficiently worried about that to commit a murder once in a while. You heard about Swami Lakshmananda, who stopped conversions in a tribal community, and so he was murdered for his services, formerly by the Maoists, but it's sometimes hard to make a distinction between the different anti-Hindu groups, missionaries, Maoists. And so the VHP, which is not what it used to be anymore, in terms of strength, does still continue its policy of Gharvapasi, of bringing the tribals and other converts back to their native religion. But so all that is well, amateur business. It's not supported by the authorities. And so the only thing to do is to inform people about the Christian doctrine and immunize them against Christian propaganda. And this is what Goelji worked on. So he wrote his book, Jesus Christ, An Artifice for Aggression. Well, first of all, you see this, for him being a historian, was the first thing he did was simply to document this whole debate, how the modern scholarship, initially Christian scholarship, now of course also non-Christian historians, started the search for the historical Jesus. And so this shows that, well, not much remains of the Christ of faith, the Christ that the church has created. So he goes into this difference between the historical Christ, who is hard to pin down, And so the doctrinal Christ that the church has created. But so at the end of it, he concludes that Jesus symbolizes no spiritual power or moral uprightness. There is no need for Hindus to convert to any belief in Jesus. Everything that they need in terms of moral support, in terms of spirituality, is amply present in Hinduism. They have no need for Jesus. In fact, something less flattering things can be said about Jesus, but even taken at his best, you see he has nothing to offer Hindus. And so if you but know Christianity as it really is, and not as propagandists and silly Hindu-born secularists try to portray him. Right, so that's where Goelji left off. You see, this is the work he did, and it is for us to continue this because Christian propaganda goes on apace, and so if people aren't immunized this way against Christian propaganda, well, it's going to succeed in India the way it succeeded in the Roman Empire. Although one hurdle they find is not Hindu resistance, it's Islamic resistance. So one scenario that people paint for the future of India is that there's going to be another partition with one part becoming Islamic and another part becoming Christian. Who knows? You see, this is a real possibility. Goelji has also written it, that the demise of Hindu society has become a distinct possibility. You see, there's no reason yet to despair, but it's a genuine concern. Okay, so much for today. I am open to questions or objections.
Thank you, Professor Els. So if anybody has a question, can you please unmute and ask the question? I do not see anybody raising hands for questions, Professor Els.
Hello.
And no objections either.
Hello, Mr.
You see,
I think
Hello,
you
Mr.
have.
Els.
Okay.
Mr. Els, I hope you remember one club called the. It does research on ancient civilizations. Means you had given talks. I'm a member of that club.
I remember your voice, but I can't see your picture here. But I recognize your voice, but that's about all. But anyway,
Yes.
you know, just tell me.
Sir, could you be our guest on 21st of November? We are trying to host another conference with you. Conference with you, sir. Sir, could we get a repeat telecast of what you told here, sir? Because we want to keep it for research purpose. Namaste, sir. Namaste, Guruji.
Well,
I hope you remember.
It depends on where. You see, I have no plans of coming to India till next year.
Online. It will be one online conference, sir.
Oh, online, no problem at all. Yeah, of course.
Sir, I hope you are able to recognize me, sir.
Yes.
Sir. Namaste,
Well,
sir.
now I do see your picture, but even not very clear.
Heckler.
But
Sir,
I do recognize you, yes. But I still don't know anymore where from.
Okay, sir.
Anyway,
Sir, on 21st, sir, we are hosting the conference, sir. And sir, could we get an appointment, sir? And sir, what exactly you told right now, sir, means about the whole Christian concept, sir. We just wish to get a repeat telecast of it, sir. And sir, another question, it is the link between Shiva and Odin, sir. We want to know about it, sir.
Sorry, the link between what and what?
Shiva and Odin. Shiva and Odin.
Oh, yeah, of course, yes. Okay, I myself wrote about comparative mythology or comparative religion, that Shiva is essentially the same divinity as Wodan, or vice versa, rather. Wodan, the Germanic god, but pre-Christian. You know, he is essentially the same figure as Shiva, though he lost a bit of his sheen during the long migration from India to Western Europe. And so, like, for example, Shiva has a third eye. That third eye, in the case of Wodan, has become one eye, right? Wodan is depicted as one eye because they didn't understand the yogic concept of the third eye anymore. And so you see these European mythologies do preserve some elements that you see in their full form flourishing in Hindu mythology, that in Europe, you know, have become compromised. So yes, you see pre-Christian religion is of course related. I mean, there's a worldwide landscape of related religions that have a lot in common, that also have local differences. Like you see within Hinduism even today, which has this whole wealth of different sampradayas, of different scriptures that are honored by different communities and so on. And so in that sense, pre-Christian religion, either because it is of the same origin, which is true of the European, most of the European religions, or of different origin like Chinese, for example, but still have a lot in common. And so that was all demonized by Christianity. You see, you have in the world a primary religion within which all kinds of variations are possible and developments and new figures coming up and so on. But you have that continuum of religion. You don't have the concept of a religion. Religion is uncountable. There is religiosity everywhere and it finds all kinds of expressions. And then you get Christianity as a doctrine with specific dogmas. You have to believe this and this and this and this, otherwise you're not a Christian. So the word religion itself has been badly compromised by this. Like in the Constitution, it says there is freedom of religion and so on. But that means a religion, you know, espousing a religion, that is to say a specific doctrine. The whole secularist idea of religion has been Christianized. And so everything that is being said about religion in the Indian legislation is really a Christian imposition on Hindus and Parsis who do not have this history.
Professor Ernst, I think we have another question from Ron.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello, sir.
This is Ron from Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from India.
Yeah.
The question that I have for you is, Hinduism that started with the Vedic origins until about 500 years ago was all about inquiry. It's about who am I? What's the nature of reality? In other words, it was all in the spirit of asking questions and answering it. But then the last 500 years, it's become more of a bhakti movement. It's become a devotional movement. It's, I believe in astrology. I believe in palmistry. I believe in this deity. So when you have this belief network, in other words, today's world is geared towards left brain people. In other words, geared towards logic and reasoning. You know, how do we figure things out? You know, so Hinduism, until 500 years ago, until the Bhakti movement started, was a left brain religion. I believe that in the last 500 years, it's become a right brain. In other words, when it is right brain, you believe it. If somebody tells you the sky is blue, you believe it rather than going and trying to figure out if that is true. So,
well,
do you think that is the case?
No, I think this bhakti or something that you know amounted to it. I mean, they didn't. There is a difference in terminology, like upasana already in the Vedic age, which also means worship more or less. And so that was already present. You see, from the Vedic age, what we have is a text. And that text is not representative for everything that existed. You see, that text was created by poets, the rishis, and, who were very sophisticated. Even many of these anti-Hindu Indologists in the West admit, that it is really great poetry. I mean, according to all the standards of what poetry should be, this is great. And it shows, of course, that there was a long pre-Vedic tradition, of which the Vedas are a culmination. So anyway, that's a very specific culture, which was very highbrow, which was very literate, was very intellectual. And around it, in fact, grew a number of sciences: astronomy, mathematics, linguistics, with Panini and everything, or everyone, Patanjali and so on. So the Vedas became the backbone of an array of sciences. That's what gave them their prestige. That's why everybody in India wanted to become part of it. Why they invited Brahmins to come and settle down in Tamil Nadu, in Bengal and so on. Why India became Brahmanized? Because it became Vedicized. Because everybody wanted to be part of that tradition. So that tradition is there, and it is important, and it is indeed, well, intellectually very highbrow, but it's not the only thing. You see, the people who just worship, maybe they didn't worship in temples, they worshiped in the open air, they worshiped sacred trees, for example. They worshiped the sun every morning at sunrise and so on. They didn't leave any writings, but they practiced worship. And so worship has been there all the time. It has taken new forms, temple worship and so on. But you see, bhakti is not an entirely new phenomenon. The only thing that did happen and that I don't like so much is that the bhakti attitude intervened in philosophy, which should be far more rational. That, after Ramanuja especially, I think is the most important turning point, where Vedanta philosophy, which is very sophisticated, at the same time becomes the backbone of this whole bhakti wave. And so today in India, most sampradayas call themselves Vedantic and practice bhakti, part of it at least. So you see, that's a trend I personally am not very comfortable with. But anyway, you see, that's me, that's my personality. So I really don't have anything against it.
I do agree with you on that. That bhakti was a small part, or it played a part before, but it wasn't the main part. Now bhakti has become the major part, to such an extent that it has replaced some of the other things. In other words, our temples used to be a place where art, culture, debate, figuring out what's the nature of reality, discussions, all that was part of the temple ecosystem.
Yeah.
But the bhakti movement has replaced a lot of it with pure bhakti. I mean, I have nothing against bhakti, but it has replaced it with a belief system from a self-inquiry system. And that is what has changed our mindset. And my theory is that the bhakti system is a right brain mentality. It's what Christianity and Islam were. And that's what Hinduism has become. It's become more of a Abrahamic religious side.
Well, for that, yes, you see, for addressing that, go read Goel's book, How I Became a Hindu. Because that gives the story of, initially, you see, he was attracted to Arya Samaj, rediscovery of the Vedas and so on. Then he also came to see, what the Puranas had to offer, the Hinduism of storytelling, of indeed belief, and so on. That also has its value. And he shows, you see, how within the broad umbrella of Sanatana Dharma, these different elements are reconciled, belong together.
Can I ask you another follow-up question?
Mr.
Yeah.
Ram,
Yes.
may I interject? Can you please keep the question to the topic of today, then general question?
Okay. Yeah.
Then
I will relinquish my question.
So do we have additional questions from anyone? Yes, Professor Shive Chaturvedi.
Yes, just a quick comment, Dr. Els, that you have really made a brilliant presentation with very thoughtful insights and comments, like the internal transformation strategy to Christianity, like the one they did in the pagan world. Very, very, very important, thought. And I think I appreciate very much, and that you brought this out up in the front. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we have just a few more minutes. Any more last questions from anyone? Yes, sir. Dave Mukherjee, please.
Yeah, I had a question about what is the status of the Western countries like America and Europe going towards the Sanatana Dharma, towards Buddhism, Hinduism? Do you see that as a trend that's also building force?
Well, yeah, the trend is there. In fact, somewhere in Goel's work, there is quite a discussion of the transcendentalists. You know, in the 19th century, there was already quite a move of Westerners towards Hinduism. Like, for instance, the most famous poem in the Dutch language, which is my language, was written by a convert to Buddhism. You know, it means in English, I love the white water lily, and so on. It's about first of all, the water lily means the lotus flower. And so it has that whole imagery of, you see how it starts in the mud down there, and then it goes up to the light. And now it doesn't desire anymore, which is the central theme of Buddhism. So, you know, that's going on and that's continuing. And the difference is that back then, they still had to, to hold their own against a mass of Christianity around them. Today, that's only a very thin presence anymore, not very obtrusive. And so what has happened is that, well, you know, science and education have democratized. More and more people have access to it. And so the idea of believing in these Christian dogmas has become untenable. It's like once you know about heliocentrism, you just can't believe in geocentrism anymore. And they may do any propaganda for geocentrism, nobody's going to fall for it anymore. And so, you see, that is what happens when you start looking at questions like the historical Christ, for instance. And so that's what could happen in India too. But in India, you have secularism, of course, which shields any weaknesses of Christianity from criticism, from inspection. So that's what Goelji and Ishwar Sharan with his book about St. Thomas were up against. You know, the fact that this is completely shielded, that also among Hindus, you still have a very strong influence from Mahatma Gandhi with the idea of Sarva Dharma Samabhava, which of course Goelji criticized in detail. The idea that all religions are equal, and, you know, I mean, that's used all the time. If Hindus object, you know, oh, you know, my daughter is going to convert, What is she going to say? Well, you and your Babas that you go to, they all say all religions are the same. Then what is the problem if I convert? So you see, if Hindus don't develop a more serious appreciation of the differences of religion, if they don't, with their left brain, so to speak, with their rational mind, start to see what Sanatana Dharma has to offer that Christianity or Islam don't, well, then this is going to continue until there is no Hinduism left. So it's very important to do this work of analyzing, of really mapping out what the religious situation is. And so that's Goel's life's work.
Thank you, LG. I think we have reached our time.
All right.
LG, namaste. Thank you so much for the inspiring talk.
See you all tomorrow.